And intro, 1, 2. Welcome to Marriage with Joy, which is the most open discussion on the internet about the positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant aspects of living in harmony with matrimony. Marriage with Joy unabashedly discusses the most interesting questions raised by listeners. Our informed and informative panel addresses issues with thought, wit, and aplomb, voted best of the web 2 years running. Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Now, how can I make the categorical statement that all the thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people all around the world that have tuned in consciously and conscientiously to Marriage with Joy are all good-looking? Because by definition, if you did tune in to Marriage with Joy, it means you're always looking for and finding the good in life. That's the definition of a good-looking person, looking for and finding the good. You can't get much gooder than the good, amazing beings on this fabulous panel, and they be good-looking as well as good-looking. So I'm going to do a brief intro while we're waiting our fourth compatriot, wonderful Maura, who is going to be coming into us from the airport. I believe it's the Philadelphia airport, which is... I could make a funny joke about Philadelphia, but I won't. So just don't say that. But I just want to, first of all, welcome everybody to Marriage with Joy, which is officially a podcast as of this particular show. And all the other shows that we've done are now going to be stacked up as podcasts. So they'll be available to the world, and we'll have many, many more than just the many thousands of users. We'll have tens of thousands, maybe 100,000, God willing, millions of people who tune into Marriage with Joy. I want to emphasize that last word, joy, because people can think it's happy and happy-go-lucky and free and thought. It's all true. But in our world, joy is a great acronym. It stands for Journey of You. And that's actually the genius part of what we've put together here. Wonderful Maura here. That marriage is involved with making sure that you understand that it's really about the journey of you. You becoming the best you possible. You doing it in harmony with someone that you each have chosen to share life with. Now, I am making a statement. I'm walking the plank and saying that in my particular world, I prefer that it be two people of opposite sex getting together. Sex, gender, whatever you want to call it, man and woman. But it doesn't matter. What really matters is that the people involved are each working for each other and themselves to find the greatest joy in life. Again, it's journey of you. And it's really quite fascinating since this is, I'm going to date this particular podcast. You always do that, but it is May 30th, the year 2023. So those of you who are watching this a century from now and marveling at that ancient kind of stuff that they had at the time called the internet, I don't know how they even got along with that, but you're watching it on some device on your thumb, and it comes out as a huge screen. You say, wow, what did they do a century ago? So this is the end of the month of May, which is marked as Mental Wellness Month. Some people call it Mental Health Month. I call it Mental Wellness, because that's really what it's about. And May is going to morph into the month of June. Now, June is usually associated with happiness and delight and flowers and romping through the fields and singing the hills are alive with the sound of music. These days, it also in the United States of America is called Pride Month. Now, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we are delivering something of value to people. But there's another word for pride. I'm going to open up before we get to some questions, which we have lots of questions to this particular show, which we won't get to all of them, of course, but some of them are just really powerful and interesting. I want to begin with a famous story that was written by a man named Hans Brinker. Hans Brinker wrote a series of very famous, well, they used to be famous stories that people used to read to other people, especially adults to kids, because they had moral underpinnings. And one of them was the great story of a young boy who lived in Holland, and Holland is a very famous country called the Low Countries, and Holland needed to build levees, we call them in America, or dikes, D-I-K-E-S, in Europe, to push back the sea and allow that process to make more farmland, actually. So it's a very wonderful process. I used to live in Holland for a number of years, so I experienced it firsthand. But it's fascinating. The particular story was about a dike or a levee that was about to break, and comes along a young boy at the night, and he puts his finger, little boy's finger, I don't know if he can do it, but, or a fist, into the hole that was going to cause the dike to break and thereby flood areas and hurt a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. But he put his hand in, or his finger, to stop up the dike, and he was there all night, shivering, freezing. They found him in the morning, almost dead, but they revived him and such. But the point of the story is the following. It's the ability to stop a problem before it becomes unstoppable. And I use that as an entree into some of the questions we're going to be dealing with today, because this particular podcast is about marriage with joy, about marriage, two people, God willing, hopefully raising a family, even if it's not their own, but are sharing with other people in a communal setting to help raise people with good moral outlooks that are there to serve community, to serve others, because that's really what marriage is about. It's service. It's like being in the military. You're in service. You take a vow to be in service. And so this issue that we're dealing with in the United States of America today in the year 2023, and it threatens to inundate other places of the world, because for the moment, the United States is exporting ideas that are not necessarily helpful for human beings. And part of those ideas have to do with gender dysphoria and really not understanding people and attacking systems that have been in place for, if not hundreds of years, thousands of years, such as the institution of marriage, a church-like atmosphere where people, again, gather together in communal service, prayer, whatever you want to call it. And these institutions are under attack, in my opinion, purposely by certain very left-wing elements. But even still, the dike could break. And we want to stop it before it becomes unstoppable. So with that as an introduction, I want to introduce, first of all, our panelists, because they are most wonderful beings. And I was just thinking of something funny. I'm sorry, I'm laughing for myself. I enjoy doing this. I used to watch a show with when we were younger, watch television together as people, called What's My Line? So you had a moderator and you had 3 or 4 panelists. I think it was 3. And each person was introduced, and they were all stellar beings. Well, we have stellar beings here. So I'm happy to tell you, introducing our starlets. Oh no, they're stellar. On the right-hand corner, hailing from the great Northwest, is wonderful Dr. Diane Medved. She's an author, a commentator, raconteur, podcaster now, and not only a devoted wife and mother, and yes, also the next generation. They call that grandmother. Okay, I said it. And then on the right-hand corner, we have wonderful Lori McDermott. She is the wife expert, and she's on the southern part of the West Coast, and down in Manhattan Beach. She's the wife expert because she deals with a lot of people who are struggling in marriage at the moment. And on the right, in the left-hand corner, normally down in the southeast of the country in Florida, but now in the almost the beginning of the Northeast in Philadelphia, I believe. She's in the Philadelphia airport, about to take off in a jumbo jet, flying first class to Europe to celebrate. Okay, fine. Why not? Who knows? You might get upgraded. Flying with her devoted husband, Jimmy, to celebrate their 40th anniversary, 2 years delayed because of either COVID or just because. and she's coming into us from the Philadelphia airport. So it's quite an interesting, amazing situation. We could even do this. And then, of course, your humble host, Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy. So we're going to jump right in and begin with one of the questions that was given to us. This came in from 139 people. And there are two parts to it, but I think they're the same. So actually, it was really over 180 people because some people asked a similar type of question. And it has to do with our overarching topic for last show and this show, maybe even next show, which is what role do parents have in directing their kids? Now, when I say kids, let's say, for want of a better term, kids are basically from 7 years old to 17. Okay, those are basically kids. After 18, someone may think that they're an adult. They probably are, but I'm just saying kids, let's say 7 to 17. And the question has to do specifically, right now, talking about the little boy with his finger in the dike, specifically when and if kids 7 to 17 get something called a smartphone. When is it appropriate? What's happening? And I think I'll throw out one statistic that I think I shared with everybody, one of the 2 articles or 3 articles that people sent us, that 70%, 70% of kids between the ages of 7 and 17, certainly upper ages, but even 7 to 13, 70% of kids have a smartphone. So from the point of view of marriage with joy, of parents directing their children, and now children having in their hands something that can access the internet and all of the benefits and all of the issues and the distortions, what does that do, A, to a family unit, B, to the child, and C, to the marriage, not in that order necessarily. So let's begin with our leadoff batter, that amazing, wonderful Dr. Diane Medved.
Oh my gosh, that is a Pan-Pacific question. I mean, you asked the hardest question, because you said between 7 and 17, when should a kid get a smartphone? Then you appended to that, what does it do to the kid, to the parents, to the family, to the relationship, to the community? Well, those are all hour-long topics.
Right. So let's just do little bits and pieces for the moment.
The hardest part, because nowadays parents are worried about safety. And the reason why it might be permissible for mature enough children to have okay, let me separate out. There's a difference between a phone and a smartphone. And some telephones may be necessary to ensure safety of a child. If a child is transferring from one mode of transportation to another and has to cross a street, or is going to someone else's house, or needs to be reached, or needs to be able to feel that he or she can reach the mom or dad, then that's a decent reason to give a child access to that. However, that doesn't mean that the child's going to get a smartphone. That means that the child can get maybe a phone and maybe not a smartphone. And I think that it's really important to make that distinction, that the smart idea of the internet, I find that there is probably a lot good for kids, but there's probably more that could be bad for kids. And because of that, I would say that any kid who does get a smartphone should have parental controls placed on it, should be given time periods that they're allowed to use it, and time periods they cannot have access to it. When the child's in the classroom, the child should not have the phone, because that is when the child should be devoting his or her attention to learning, to the teacher, to the environment. When the child's having dinner with the family, all phones should not be in the room, because that's when the children and parents have time to commune together. And that should be considered sacred. And it should be discussed as a time that is precious and that should not be disturbed by outside influences. So by setting parameters, it may be possible to control. However, we know that it's really impossible to control because kids have access to other kids' phones and kids go over to other people's houses. And kids are going to have to learn what are the dangers and what are the good aspects of the internet. Lots of times kids have homework online and they have to use the internet. So they may have a smart, something that is a computer-esque kind of device rather than a phone that they can take. I think there's something dangerous about having it in your pocket, having the world and the internet and pornography in your pocket. I think it's a lot better if you can have a device that is purposefully used. And so, okay, I still didn't answer what age should a kid get a phone?
You don't have to, by the way. If you want to, you can answer, but
every kid is different. Some are mature, some are immature. Some break things, some are careful with things. And I think you have to assess the individual child and your relationship with that child before you determine when is the proper age. Probably when the kid's driving, I would say it might be useful to have a telephone. To have a smartphone is debatable. And you might say to the child, we'll give you access to a phone to reach us, but when you're 18, you can get a smartphone, something like that. I don't have the right answer.
I want to correct you on something, and I do this with love and respect. Your answers are correct in the sense that we're here to share with each other and all these many tens of thousands of people. So people want to know what you think. So that's the correct answer. I would ask you one question to pinpoint something. It's hard for me to understand, and I'm thinking back when I was a kid. I mean, kids want anything, especially if they're, call them peers. They're not peers. They're other kids. People don't have peers until they're, I think, 17, 18, 19. And even then, you got to be careful who you're calling a peer. But it's just other people. And if they're influenced by other kids because, well, Johnny has one, that becomes an interesting dilemma. And I can't even imagine that a 7, 8, 9-year-old, I'm staying below double digits, in any scenario should have one of these things that we call a smartphone. I mean, I'm just being very blunt.
Okay, you asked a question, and I think that this goes back way before the phone issue. Every family has to set its values clearly. And if the child is raised to believe our family has a set of values that we believe will enhance our health as a family, as a unit, and as individuals, and you emphasize why, that it's going to be better for you and your life if you abide by the values that we would like you to have and show them that you care about them and that they're important for your relationship and how you personally have modeled those values. If you're going to just say, do this and then do something different, you're going to say, well, we don't have a phone at the table and then have yours there. That's never going to work.
So this is what I was hoping you'd say.
Set of values and distinguish your family from other families. You asked about when somebody says, well, Johnny has a phone, blah, blah, blah. And that's when you say our family holds that phones are only appropriate after age 18, or our family has values that value interpersonal relationships above something on a device. And explain why a device is inferior to interpersonal relationships. Explain what people can get. You can get a hug from mom, but you can't get a hug from a device. All you can do is get words from other people that you then interpret to be a hug. And that isn't the real thing. We want you to learn about the real world where people care directly, where people show their love for you, where people can do favors for other people and can be kind to other people. You can't do that on a device. And we want you to learn those skills above all. And if you verbalize that and reinforce it and even write it out for the child, then they're going to understand that you may not listen when they make the argument Johnny has, because their whole life they've been raised in an environment where what Johnny has doesn't matter. What we believe and what we do is where we start and end.
This I love deeply, and I really appreciate you emphasizing it again. It starts way before the child is 7. It's what the family does and how it models and acts prior to that. So that when it comes time, the 7, 8, 9, 10, or whatever, and you're challenged, but okay, it's a normal challenge, let's say, and yet it can be done in such a way as a learning experience. It's a great moment to learn, to emphasize again, well, this is what we do. Isn't that wonderful? With a hug, and beautiful. Thank you. Maura, so you're not hanging around any 7-year-olds or 8, 10, 12, 15s these days, not regularly, but you see them a lot. And I assume you know. So tell us what you think. In other words, let's put you back. Your daughter now is out of the home and she's married and such. But let's say she's not. Let's say she's 9 years old and she says, Mom, where's my smartphone? Where's my iPhone or my Android or whatever it is?
Right. No, very good. And you're right. I mean, I may have a grown-up child, but I'm out there and I see a lot going on. The first thought I want to introduce today, and I hope you could all hear me since I am in the airport, and I tried getting in the United Club, which closes at 6 p.m., which did me no good. Anyway, the first thought for any parent is that when your child has a smartphone, you have now introduced into the family unit a very intimate, what could be an interloper of a nefarious sort, a very intimate addition to the family unit. The second thing I wanted to say, and I think this takes up the issue of the age, is that children are different. What works for one child does not work for another. You know, our daughter came into the earth as an old soul. And I can remember when I decided it was time for her to be able to get a phone and to babysit and to do things like that. But I've also been around other young people who are delayed, let's say, in maturity, and they don't know how to register good decisions. So I might have a few children and decide one is ready and one is not. And that would be based on past performance and the ability to make wise choices. So those were the two starting points. The third thing happened as recently as today. Very interesting. You know, you're speaking about young people having access to these smartphones. My husband ended up giving to a dad and his son who couldn't get on a bus today because they didn't have enough cash to get to Atlantic City. Now, this was fascinating to me. The son was 14 years old. The two of them they had difficult times. There were no drugs involved. You could see that. But as much as they did not have enough money to get on the bus, the 14-year-old, very quiet son pulled out a smartphone. And I thought to myself, this is a very interesting scenario where we would sometimes think that, let's say it's not just peer pressure, it's also, do we have the funds for a smartphone? And I would like to suggest for parents that are listening tonight to be wise about your children. Maybe one is ready at a certain time, one might not be ready until another time. But here's the other thing. I love the idea of creating a culture where you are not run by cell phones, not because you're saying no, not because the standard is no, but because you're being a little bit creative. And I want to share something. I don't know if any of you ever had read this, but I never forgot it. And I know we did it a lot at our home, not only with our daughter, but with everybody that came through the house, all of her friends. We would have everybody discuss things at the table. We would literally turn.
What an idea.
You know who used to do it? The Kennedy family used to do it. They would have the adults and all the children, and everybody had an opportunity to be part of the same conversation and answer some challenging questions, which meant they all learned how to glean from each other. They all learned to formulate responses, to think on their own, to contribute. The bottom line for all of that is, in any environment, and I've seen it as an adult where I've been involved in organizations, but I also saw it as a child in my own home. I was brought up in what I used to call the no house. Everything was no. If you asked if you could do it, the answer was no. And I would remember saying, but I didn't even ask you yet. My mother would say, the answer's no. And other people, the answer's no. So here's the way I try to rethink things, and hopefully this will be of assistance to parents today. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the age of a child, although it can be. It doesn't necessarily have to do with what everybody else is doing, because everybody, young and old, feel that way, like the pressure, social pressure. Why not be creative? Why not be the fun family? Why not be the family that does things differently? Why not create new things that work well so that when your child is with you or your children are with you, they're engaging in something fun, creative, learning. I can remember when our daughter was younger, and has nothing to do with cell phones. My husband had a rule in the car. When we were in the car, there was no radio on because everybody would have a chance to talk together. And you know what else? Then he would come up with games. So our time was family time. We were establishing our own traditions. I would always lose every game, but they would come up with competitive games. They would call the punch buggy games. How many times did you find this kind of a car versus that? You know, what's the first thing you could find? What's the letter on this part of the alphabet? And everybody would laugh. Everybody would be alert, but everybody was participating in something. So what you're essentially doing, rather than fighting a culture that may be errant, dangerous, risky, not so great for the family, use your own creativity. And it's always easy. You could look it up on the internet. What can we do as a family that's fun? And incorporate those into your lives. So the child, instead of feeling like odd man out, could say, hey, when my family and I get together, we have a blast. We do X and Y and Z. And then I'm going to say this from my own experience, had nothing to do with cell phones. I could remember going to friends' house where they would do things differently. To this day, I have great memories. And to this day, our daughter and her friends have great memories of doing things differently. So instead of always feeling like you might be reactionary and fighting against a tide, be creative. Come up with something that defines you, your family, the things you want to focus in on, high-level things, and memories that your family can enjoy. And while you're doing it, you're helping to develop very good and healthy relationships.
I love it. Especially today is May 30th, as I mentioned. Yesterday was May 29th, Memorial Day, which of course is rooted in memories. Wonderful. First of all, I've been in a number of homes where I know the no family. I've seen that. The answer is no.
Oh, okay, like mine.
Interesting enough, not in my family growing up. My mother, especially, my father, a little more on the no side, but he didn't speak much. But our family was very big on singing at the table, because I just enjoyed singing, and my sisters enjoyed singing. We sang, and it was crazy. And people would come over, friends of ours, and have dinner with us, and they told me later, say, your family's crazy. I said, yeah, isn't it wonderful? Now, Lori, by the way, I'll give you another thing about no, but I love that word interloper for the phone, interesting enough, and be creative, be different. Lori, you have a unique situation because you have 3 young people ranging in the age from 12 to 17, 12 to 18, 12 to 19?
I have kids ranging from 16 to 22.
16 to 22, close enough for government.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
So at one time though, your 16-year-old, let's go back just 3 years, was 13, and the 22 was 19. So when they were 13 to 19, did everybody have an interloper, a smartphone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a point of contention. Yeah, so when go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, was it a bone of contention? Was it a difficult issue to deal with?
Well, I have a problem with phones all the time. I walk in with my son, I'm in his bedroom now. They'll all be laying here. There'll be 5 kids here, and I'm like, don't you people talk to each other? And that's they're going to be deficient in communication and eye contact. And that's exactly what happens. So I have rules. You walk in the house, you come up to me and you say, hello, Mrs. Dillman. You shake my hand, you look at me in the eyes. And if they screw it up, I go out, come back in again. I have no problem making them feel uncomfortable because we're going to practice eye contact. And then my daughter, I'll walk, she's got a boyfriend. And every time I walk in, like I can tap and open the door, and the two of them are laying side by side on their phones, and I'm like, they're never going to get pregnant if they get married one day. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like that's all they do is sit on their phones. And both of them are on TikTok or Instagram. And it's like, what a mind waster. I remember being with my son at the ER, and we were there for like 5 hours. And I was like so bored, and I'm never bored. But he's like, Mom, go on here. And I went on TikTok for the first time, and hours passed. And I was like, ha, 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 ha. Time waster. I needed to waste time, but it sucks you in, and hours just disappear. And so our poor kids are getting sucked in and not paying attention and not learning eye contact and talking to people. And it makes me really scared. But to comment on a few other things, Mara mentioned about how cell phones are with poor people. And don't you want to pay some bills before you get a cell phone? Well, here's what happens in California. If you don't make enough money, the state of California gives you a phone for free, and they pay your bill. So you will see homeless people on the street corner texting somebody. And I just find that fascinating because they feel they don't want them to get left behind with technology. So years ago, when my husband first introduced cell phones to our family, I was reluctant. I'm like, I don't need one of those. I'm fine. I like my little push button thing. But he wanted the smart one. Well, then I found out a month after we got one that he was having an affair on his. And so that threw me back, and I decided I didn't like cell phones at all. So I put them away, not at the table, nowhere, no how. I had an older son who got one, and then my daughter was mad because she wanted one too. But I knew where she was at all times. She didn't have extra sports or anything. My older son did. So he would go to a sport, and he would need to be picked up, and people were moving, and things were constantly shifting. And I'd have to find him. And I finally decided he needed a phone so I could find him. And that it was more of safety, like for me to know where he was and I could track him. Sometimes my husband and I on a Friday night will sit up with our phone and be like, where's our kids at? And we can see them crawling, doing wherever, like, because their phone, we can track them. And I find a great source of comfort with that. So I do think it's good for that. I don't like phones at the table. If the kids bring the phones to the table, mine's always away. So sometimes I don't even know where it is. I turn mine off, and you can't bother me after a certain period of time. But my kids will have to have it on. What if my friend calls me? What if this happens? Well, I don't know. Are you making money with them? Like, are you going to die? But I will say something. You guys were talking about, like, when is it the right time? When is it the right time to give a child a phone? For me, it's safety. The other one that was really important, I was the last one to get my kid a phone. All of his friends had phones. And you could play the game. Well, not in our household. But what happens is all those kids talk to each other. And they go here and they go there. And my son isn't in the loop at all. So I pulled him out of like having friendships. So I got him a phone so he can stay entwined in those friends so he wouldn't feel left out. And I made that decision. It worked. And then I was like, oh, I could track him on this. It became a positive thing. But all those apps and things like that, every year it gets more complicated. I used to have all these watch things on them, see what they were watching. I could access their phone. I can't, like, it gets harder and harder every year. You can't get into those things now. But then I'm like, my youngest is 16. It's time for him to be responsible. So far, so good. But if he screws up, guess what? I can take his phone away from him. If he didn't have a phone, I couldn't take it away from him. To threaten him, if you don't do this, I'm taking your phone. Oh, you better believe it. He will do what I ask him to do because he doesn't want to lose his phone. So it becomes giving a child a phone is like a car privileges. It becomes something that you can punish them and take away from them. And they pretty much honor you. So there's a lot of positives and there's a lot of negatives. And 20, 30 years from now, if your kid doesn't have a cell phone at a younger age, they miss like all the things. Like if I ever get stuck with my cell phone at the grocery store, how you need that app to check out with coupons. I'm like, how do I use a digital coupon? I can never find it. It's like 50 buttons. So I find a 10-year-old. I'm like, can you help me get a coupon? And they're like, yeah, sure. And my kids couldn't have done that when they were 10 because they didn't have a phone.
So I want to mention a few things that you said that I find very intriguing. You use the same word that Diane did, was the safety issue. And it's fascinating because the safety issue, by definition, cuts both ways, a double-edged sword. It is the safety that you want to be able to make sure that you know where the child is and the child knows where you are and you can communicate. The other part of the safety issue is that if it's something called a smartphone, which is obviously an oxymoron because it's not, is that it is an entree into the world of the internet, which by definition is not safe. By definition, not safe. It's not safe for people who are 74, people who are 44, 34, certainly 24, and 14. I'll just make mention of something as an aside. Yesterday, I had the great privilege of speaking to a group of 19 kids between the ages of 13 and 14. They were all boys in the local school and came in to speak about joy in 40 minutes. And I'm looking at these kids, and first of all, it was difficult even for me to find gaining their attention, most of them, some of the time. And I'm pretty good at gaining attention for people, but they were all over the place. And I realized that if you give these kids these things called smartphones, they can't handle this stuff. And this is heavy lift. It's like asking them to say, okay, you now need to read Dostoevsky, War and Peace. No, they can't do it. They're not even going to pick it up, because it'd be too much. That's what this phone thing is. It has so much in it, and it's too easy, like you said, wonderful Lori. Time, forget about that, because it doesn't exist anymore. I live now in Henderson, Nevada. So what is Henderson famous for? Swimming pools, of course. No, it's close to Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, what is the most interesting fact of Las Vegas, Nevada? Casinos. What's the most interesting fact about casinos? Millions and millions of square feet, right? All dedicated to something. We'll call it entertainment. I call it gambling. Not a clock in millions of square feet. No clocks. Because you don't want people being aware of time, right? That takes away from what you want them to do, is concentrate on gambling. They call it gaming. Gambling. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're gambling with our kids' lives, certainly with their minds. It's an interesting dilemma. And I can hear, because first of all, you're paying. So the good news is, because you're paying, there's a tether there that is just strong enough that you can use that as a mechanism to get something that you want for their benefit. I'll take it away. So, because they're not buying it right now. And by the way, let's be blunt. These smartphones are not inexpensive. $1,000 is that's nothing. And then, of course, it's a few $100s every month for the service. In a world where people actually are concerned about paying for their groceries, it's real money. Thank God, we're all privileged. But let's be blunt. This is not chump change stuff. And it's real. And there are people buying things all the time that they most of the time don't want. But I want to go back to one other thing. It's the A word. So we talked about time being a suck. We talked about not having eye contact. And so what Diane mentioned about, it's not that you put your phone down on the table. There's no phones. You can't come to the table with a phone. That's it. Now, I have a friend who plays a great game with his friends when they go out. He's a younger friend of mine. He's 46. He calls himself old, but he's a younger friend of mine. And when they go out to dinner or someplace together, if people put their phones down, they have to put them face down. And the rule is, I think I mentioned before, the first person to turn it over and do something, no matter what, even if you told people, I'm expecting a call or a text, first person to pick it up pays. So, you got 5-6 people there, that's $500. So people are careful. But I'm just saying, this eye contact is something that doesn't happen. So as an example, just yesterday when I went into the room and I shook hands, these are all young men. They're not men, they're 13 or 14. I shook hands with a couple of them. they couldn't make eye contact. So I shook hands and said, hello, I'm over here. Eyes, please. And this is a private school. So, let's be blunt. Even when I was 13, 14, did I? Okay, I was raised in a different household. So I did, but it's not simple. These are things, as you said, wonderful Diane, these need to be modeled. These needs to be taught. And it's very hard to teach them on this. This becomes their teacher. Ah! That's scary. Okay, let's continue with this. In this same pathway, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal months ago, and then I think we got an article which I sent to everybody because it was sent to me. Again, hundreds and hundreds of people sending me these similar articles and things like that. There's even a movement amongst the hippest kids to get flip phones. You know what a flip phone is, right? Flip phone is not an internet phone. It's just a flip phone. You use it to make a phone call, which interestingly enough, and I'm talking about hip kids. I'm not talking about deprived and things like that. These are kids in their, let's say 18 to 26. There's a whole movement now. They have an iPhone or an Android, but when they go out, they take their flip phone. And one of the quotes, I read a couple of them, mostly girls, by the way, I'll say this, the guys less so, but the girls, they were quoted, 3 of them said the same thing. I don't want to be bothered with all that stuff. You hear this? It was so interesting that people were recognizing, if I have my thing with me and somebody texts me, it's almost like I'm obligated to respond. But if I don't have it, as opposed to not having anything, in other words, I have a communication device, so I can make a phone call. That's cool. But I don't have to have all that other stuff. I thought that was amazing. And then, so this is the question. We won't have full time to answer it. One of the articles that I think I sent to everybody, which was sent to me dozens and dozens of times, there's a movement called Wait Until 8th. Wait until 8th. In other words, wait until the 8th grade, or I guess 13 years old, before you even consider giving your child, son or daughter, a internet device, phone. That's what I'm calling it. Now, for some families, that's really tough. Wait until they're 13. Not 17, 18. I like 18, but that's okay. Wait until 8th. So I'm going to throw it out as a beginning question. We'll start with you, Diane, of course. Thank you. And tell me what you think, first of all, about the concept. The group that started this has now plus minus 45,000 members nationwide, and families joining every week, apparently. It's a gig. Stuff is happening because people are recognizing that there's too much to lose when you give somebody below the age of 13 one of these things, even though they may not have the friendships and such. Mm-hmm. So up to you, Diane. Wait until 8th. What do you think about that one?
Well, there's a reason why Jewish people have bar mitzvahs at age 13. And actually girls at 12.
Yeah, because girls are more mature, but okay.
Exactly. But it's because it does take a childhood to learn what's good for you, or at least to be able to even judge what's good for you. So waiting till 8th, I mean, applause, because that creates a culture where it's okay not to have a phone before that. It creates a time period where the child can look toward that and then discuss beforehand why. Why do we want to wait until 8th grade? What is it about the internet that isn't necessarily helpful or good for you or good for anybody? And I think that's a really great idea. I mean, if it would be a universal policy, I think it would help a lot of kids, because although there are a lot of kids who are alone, and that is sad, I think just discussing what the perils are and the pitfalls and the proper use of a phone, all those things can be distilled into this project, whereby by waiting until 8th, then you have something that you look forward to and think more seriously about. It becomes less casual and it becomes more consequential. And I think also The fact that it's national and that there's a lot of people subscribing to this policy makes it easier for individual parents to try and ask their kids to conform to it. They can say, well, I've come across this. There's thousands and thousands of kids who are part of this movement, so that you can have a childhood that is free. So you can have a childhood where you just play and have fun. I wrote a book with my husband called Saving Childhood, Protecting Our Children from the National Assault on Innocence. And that's what this is. It's protecting our children from assaulting their childhoods. So applause, applause. It's too bad it can't be wait until 18 instead of 8. But given the realities of the situation, I think it's a great idea. And I hope that more and more people hear about it and do it.
Well, because of our show, I think more and more people will be hearing about it and subscribing. It's just an organization where nobody asks you to give any money or anything like that. It's just things to do. Now, interesting enough, because I did do some more research on it, and I'll be asking, obviously, Maura and Lori to comment, that as many as there are, again, 45,000 and growing, I think they said by 1,000 or 2,000 every month. Interesting enough, in particular schools, so they, in this article, they talked to a couple of families, say, well, my kid's in the minority. Everybody else that's 11 and 12 and even 10, they all have these devices already. So the kid feels like, well, I got 4 or 5 friends that don't, and then another one fell by the wayside, so he feels more ostracized. But this goes to our overarching idea that we're working with in Marriage with Joy, and that we've been discussing the past week and this week, maybe next week also, is what power, and I'm saying this with a positive P, what power do the parents have in this particular area, where we know with not the NO, but the KNOW, we know that there is a safety issue with a smartphone. And that to delay that process, and as you said wonderfully well, Diane, this national assault on childhood, to be able to delay that process to at least the age of 13, where first of all, anticipation is very nice, looking forward to something, and the ability to run through the meadows singing. I mean, just what an amazing idea. I mean, I did it as a kid, but then again, we didn't even have telephones. We had, tin cans and a string, so we didn't have to worry about that. But I think it personally, when I read about this or I heard about it because somebody sent it to me. So I'm reading about it now. You're right, I'm applauding it also. So I'm going to ask you, wonderful Maura, your thoughts first of all on this. Wait until 8th, and is it something that you think you would have or could have done when your daughter was, let's say, 9, 10, 11, 12?
Yeah, I have a couple of points and I'll make them quickly. The first is, at the moment I heard you say 14, I thought the same thing Diane mentioned. I thought, that's when we do bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And then for the Catholics, I can't speak for, all these other groups of people, but Catholics would confirm their children usually at 14. It's that point in time. Think about all the preparation involved. Think about it's a rite of passage. There is preparation, there is learning, there is a demonstration of what you've learned. And if you think about it and set it up for your child as, we're going to make sure that you know how to look people in the eye, that you can have a regular conversation, that you can make good quality decisions that show me, show your parents, show your friends around you that you are mature enough to not just always follow what everybody else is doing, but to follow what's good as a young adult. Then it becomes something to look forward to. Now, the third thing I wanted to address, and I think this may hit some parents, I'm going to tell you, when I became a parent, I recognized that I had, let's say, deficiencies in my own upbringing. And it was very important to me to be a parent that brought up a child in a healthy manner. So I had to really gather together sometimes my own confidence, my own learning, and ability to do things the right and healthy way. And here's what I want to leave any other parent with as a thought. When you want to say no at some level, or let's say set up a boundary, Be prepared to do it with a smile on your face, with confidence in your heart, and with a good intention explained to your child, with a good outcome in mind, where you're both working towards something that's going to be beneficial for them. And sometimes for parents that still struggle, let's say, with wanting to be like everybody else, not wanting their child to be left out. There's so many things that play into family dynamics. Take it upon yourself to be a good, positive, influential leader that gives a message in your presence, in your expectation out to your child that we're going to do this together. We're going to make it work, and I'm going to be your champion, and I'm going to be watching you to do well because I want you to have that phone when you're 14. And if none of that works, say, and by the way, we're not alone in this. There are at least 2,000 new people a month doing the same thing. So it kind of bolsters the concept that everybody else is doing it. And the one other thing I was thinking about when you mentioned this, if you notice every 20 years, there's this feeling of retro. People want to go back to the past. Where were we 20 years ago? Flip phones. And people, young kids, are turning it into the new cool thing. So be the cool parent, bringing up cool kids, looking forward to doing cool things, and being a cool young adult who is past whatever they need to do as their qualifiers to get that phone at 14. My thoughts.
Woo! Wonderful, Lori. What do you think about wait until 8th? If your kids were in the, let's say, go back now 6 years ago, your daughter was 10 and your son is 16. So he's having his phone already. But what do you think about waiting until 8th for the other kids?
I would be all for it as long as the parents, like kind of what we were talking about, like kind of like a conglomerate, like you agree with people in your society, in your friendship circles, or in your kids' friendship circles that you're going to do this. Especially at a private school, you can easily have a dialogue with the teacher or with the principal and say, what do you think about doing this? And making it kind of like a universal ban, because at the end of the day, a lot of teachers at the local high school here, every time you go to parents meeting, it's like there's some teachers have a phone slot at the door. You have to put your phone in the slot before you go sit down because they don't like them either. Although there are times in class, okay, everyone look up so-and-so and give me your best answer of what you think it is. Well, if they all didn't have phones, they wouldn't be able to do that. So there are some times when it's necessary, or if I'm in the car and I'm driving and I'm like, oh, someone quickly look up, where do I go to get gas? Because I'm driving, I can't figure this out. I'm not going to get on my phone. So one of my kids will do that. And that's always been something that I've instructed people to do. One of the problems that I do have, and I'll hurry up real quick, is all my kids have phones. Well, sometimes they turn them off. And so when I can't find them or they're not responding to texts and their phone is off, I am a freak out because I pay for that phone. God damn it, I need to know where you are. And so when I was a kid, I walked out that door like at 10 on Saturday and I didn't show up till 6. So my parents didn't know where I was.
By the
either.
way, that was 6 the next morning. I understand. Yes.
Right. No, I came home when the street light went on. I was one of those kids. Street lights on, you have to go home. But my kids don't know what that's like. You know, I say, be home by this time. And my youngest is like, what? You didn't say that. It's dinner. Oh, are we eating?
You mean kids are always kids when it comes down to it?
Right. How weird.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Which actually is probably the way to finish this session and then use it as a segue for the next session, because I want to continue this, the process of integrating let's for want of a better term, the current society into our homes and making sure that the home is the dominant influence and that the society takes second step. And yet we still have to do it in such a way, as you mentioned, Maura, with a smile. And as you mentioned, wonderful Diane, with that safety issue. And as you said, fabulous Lori, that it's built around eye contact, because we do need to recognize that it's an addiction. It truly is, or can be, an addiction. Not that it is an addiction. It can become an addiction. It's far too easy. I mean, again, I hang around a lot of people because of my swimming and things that I do. And it's just amazing to me. And I see myself doing it sometimes, and I say, "What are you doing?" to me. Stop, because I had to put that phone down. Because, all right, we're humans, but to be able to recognize when it comes to time together for eating, when it comes time to look people in the eye, when it comes time to discuss and be creative and have fun while you're driving. I mean, I love this, by the way, that Jimmy didn't have the radio on and such like that. My father tried to do that with us a few times. Didn't work, but that's okay. He tried it. And that was only when we had AM radio. And, all it was AM radio, and we didn't even want to listen to the station they had on, but still, it was sometimes better than, looking out the window. Okay, this has been absolutely wonderful. I truly, truly appreciate your time, your input, as do all the people who listen to us. So as we do, of course, before we finish, we do our group hug. We look forward to everybody else listening and sharing the podcast. We urge you all, listen to the podcast and share with 5 people. I didn't say 50 or 100. If you want to do that, that's up to you. But share it with 5 people. So that means we'll have hundreds of thousands of people listening. And keep sending me these issues that you want to discuss, because they're just so fascinating. They're so real. They're so now. And they really make a difference, because the overarching idea is called marriage with joy. Marriage, we're the dike, we're the hole in the dike, we're the ones that are putting our finger in it. Marriage is what's literally keeping us from being swamped. This is what marriage is. We need it. Without marriage in the United States of America, I can tell you categorically, there is no hope. With marriage, we can overcome. Okay, I'm showing my 60s. All right, everybody ready for that wonderful hug? Heartfelt, unlimited giving. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our blessing for everybody is go forth. Live exuberantly. Spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Go mad. Go make a difference. Bye. Thank you. Oh, man. Welcome to Marriage with Joy, which is the most open discussion on the internet about the positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant aspects of living in harmony with matrimony. Marriage with Joy unabashedly discusses the most interesting questions raised by listeners. Our informed and informative panel addresses issues with thought, wit, and aplomb. Voted best of the web 2 years running.